For the past few years in my Philosophy of the Human Person course, my students and I have been reading Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. And Alistair mentioned this yesterday, so I won't give you a whole summary plot. But basically, in the novel's New Society, human beings are engineered using embryonic twinning, fetal manipulation, neo-Pavlovian training techniques, as well as medicine to create the perfect society. So the state is stable, and for all appearances, the people there in this new society seem to be happy. When the people start to feel out of sorts, world controller Mustafa Mand says, there's always Soma, to calm your angers, to reconcile you to your enemies, to make you patient and long-suffering. And he goes on to say, the old-fashioned way was we had to do this by hard work, but now we've got Soma. So in other words, there's always a way to keep people happy. There's always a way to keep the society rather, free from conflict. The trade-off, of course, is art and beauty and God and difference among individuals and a robust sense of freedom. So in the course of this unit, in the course that I teach, I always ask the students, so what do you think? Would you want to live in this society? Should we do it? And every year, the students unanimously tell me that they wouldn't want to be in this so-called utopian society. They'd rather have the wars, the crime, the everyday conflicts than the engineered stability. But why? Well, many of them say that the people in this society just aren't real. As Mustafa Mand puts it, and I quote here, the people are so conditioned that they practically can't help behaving as they ought to behave. They just can't help it. They don't have real freedom. They don't have real virtue. Now, when Huxley wrote Brave New World in 1932, the world was in the midst of an economic depression, and that meant unemployment was ubiquitous, there was poverty, and of course, there was hunger. Also fresh in Huxley's mind were the evils of World War I and its aftermath. So in the novel, he writes of a society that solves these kinds of world problems. How does he solve it in the novel? Well, they systematically fix people so that happiness and stability might persist. Now, the evils in 2018 are not so very different from the evils of 1932. And I think it's rather uncontroversial to suggest that the world would be better if humans were to commit fewer bad actions. Some people think that we can make this world a reality. Now, proponents of moral enhancements suggest that technology might be used to bring about a more peaceful, happier sort of world. And some argue that this may be affected simply by changing people's behaviors. Like, for example, someone could implant a chip in my brain and stop me from committing bad actions. I mean, hypothetically. We don't really have this technology quite yet, but it could happen, right? So that's a behavior kind of approach. Now, others argue that moral enhancements instead are a matter of giving people the right moral attitudes, which may or may not involve directly controlling behavior. So we could give people just the right attitudes. We could, in fact, make them morally virtuous, or we could give them a greater capacity for moral goodness, not merely have them commit fewer bad actions. And this latter sort of enhancement, this one that's aimed at attitudes, perhaps making people to be morally good, that's the type of moral enhancement that I want to address. And here's my central question. It's this: whether such an enhancement is actually possible. Is it possible to morally enhance someone such that she becomes virtuous? There are a couple ways to understand the question. On the one hand, one might understand possible in practical terms. That is, are moral enhancement technologies practically, that is, technologically possible? And some thinkers like James Hughes like Mark Walker, do think that such technologies either already exist or they're quite plausible. Walker argues, and I think this is not controversial, he argues that genes influence human behavior. Okay? And he goes on to think that if we could just promote or if we could suppress certain genes, then we could, in his words, engineer genetic virtue in humans. Now, both Hughes and Walker see our primary present task as a mapping sort of activity. So they say, really, what we need to do is map what they call, and here I'm quoting, the consilience between neuroscience and the moral psychology of virtue ethics, end quote. So once we discover which genes, which areas of the brain, which neurochemicals are linked to particular virtues and vices, technologies like CRISPR-Cas9, embryonic selection, and also medications might be used to make someone morally virtuous. Okay, so that's the first way to understand possible. Is moral enhancement technologically possible? A second way to understand possible, that is, again, whether it's possible to morally enhance someone such that she become virtuous, is in absolute terms, regardless of advances in technology. And this is a philosophical question, and my answer to the question is no, at least from an Aristotelian perspective. Moral enhancements, including genetic or neurochemical alterations, cannot in themselves engender moral virtue in us, no matter what technologies are developed. And here's why. From the Aristotelian point of view, you can't have real moral virtue without prudence. And prudence just is not the sort of thing that can be engineered in humans by means of biological or neurochemical tinkering. All right, so to flesh out the argument, the first thing I want to do is take a look at Aristotle's account of moral development and virtue. So I want to start with children. All right, here we go. Children begin with certain natural tendencies, and we might think of these as something akin to a given temperament. That's a good way to think about it. These natural tendencies, this given temperament for Aristotle, is not yet a moral virtue. They're what he calls, given temperaments are what he calls natural virtues. In ordinary cases, though, children from a very early age begin to undergo moral training, and children learn how to act well through punishment and reward and also imitation. But still, even if little Tommy learns to share his blocks with his sister, just because he'll be punished, like go to timeout if he doesn't, his sharing is not yet the virtue of generosity. It's still a kind of natural virtue, even at this stage. So for Aristotle, natural virtues come in two kinds. So the first kind are those innate tendencies, that's the given temperament. And the second kind are learned habits, but they're yet unreasoned. Really, so it's just a simple matter of punishment, reward, or imitation. I'm doing it because I saw somebody else do it. Neither type of natural virtue, again, is yet a full-fledged moral virtue because they each lack some crucial elements. First, true moral virtues are dispositions to act for the right reason. Among these right reasons is not fear of punishment, it's not some external reward, it's not a given temperament or a matter of imitation. In Aristotle's view, the right reason to act is for the sake of the good, full stop. In other words, the virtuous person does what is good and orders her actions toward the good in itself, which of course she recognizes as good, and not merely acting for the sake of avoiding punishment or to get some reward. Furthermore, not only does the virtuous person act for the sake of the good, but she also delights in it. She gets joy from doing what is good, and she repudiates and is pained by what is evil. Thus, the movement to a mature stage of development includes right action accompanied by knowledge of the good and a desire for that good, as well as proper affect, like taking joy in doing the right thing. But still, proper affect, recognition of, and desire for the good for its own sake are not all that's required for full-fledged moral virtue. So Aristotle defines moral virtue this way. I'm sure we're familiar with it from the Nicomachean Ethics, and I'll just read the definition to you. So he says, virtue is a state of character concerned with choice, lying in a mean, the mean relative to us, this being determined by a rational principle, and by that principle by which the man of practical wisdom would determine it, end quote. So according to Aristotle, a second necessary component for full-fledged moral virtue is reasoned discernment. And this reasoned discernment is what he calls practical wisdom, or prudence. So that's what I want to focus on next, Aristotle's account of prudence, in order to see its necessary connection to moral virtue. Moral virtue for Aristotle is a disposition to do what is right for the right reason, at the right time, in the right place, with the right sorts of people, et cetera, et cetera. So for example, take the virtue of temperance. Temperance is a disposition that disposes one to enjoy the pleasures of taste and touch well. So it's a matter of, say, enjoying a particular food in the right amount, at the right time, for the right reason, and so on. Knowing what is right, what means are right, what time is right, etc., is itself a virtue, namely prudence. Prudence is a kind of seeing, or a capacity for seeing, to see what one must do in order to act well right here and now, in a given particular situation. Not only does this mean that the prudent person, the phronimos, has a grasp of moral principles, that is, knowledge of the final end for humans and, in general, what conduces to that final end. But she also has a capacity to figure out just what's going on right here, right now. This getting the situation right is critical for the prudent person's task of deliberating about what to do right now. Aristotle's own homely example illustrates the point. A little excitement here, some bacon. Okay, so here's what he says. He's going to talk about meats. For if a person knew that light meats are digestible and wholesome, that's a universal principle, but didn't know which sorts of meats are light, or maybe even what sorts of meats were in front of him now, particular knowledge, he would not produce health. But the man who knows that chicken is wholesome is more likely to produce health, end quote. So the prudent person in this case knows that chicken, light meat, before him now is conducive to health. In other words, eating this chicken is a probable means to his end of promoting health. So the phronimos then, the prudent person then, is one who is excellent with respect to deliberating about means that conduce to the end, like eating chicken is conducive to health. But the phronimos' work does not end with mere possession of knowledge. That's not it. You can know that chicken is healthier than bacon, but still misjudge what ought to be done here and now. So the prudent person then has to make a judgment about what's to be done. And this is a moral judgment, not just a theoretical judgment. So the moral judgment is accompanied by a command, a do this. Okay? So the phronimos then makes a judgment and executes her judgment. She acts. She eats the chicken. In Aristotle's view then, no person can have full-fledged moral virtue without prudence. And I quote Aristotle here, again from the Ethics. He says, "It is not possible to be good in the strict sense without practical wisdom," prudence. Okay, so now that we've considered briefly Aristotle's account of moral virtue and his account of prudence, let's go back to the bacon, it's nicer. Let's return to the central question. That is it possible to morally enhance someone such that she becomes virtuous, like really, truly virtuous in the strict sense? whatever technology might be used, like CRISPR-Cas9 or neurochemical treatments, I argue that this is impossible. It is impossible to engineer moral virtue in humans, given Aristotle's account. Now, someone might initially think that we can engineer moral virtue in human agents because, in fact, current and proposed moral enhancement technologies do impact the affective dimension of the person. That is, they can give people the right sorts of feelings. Right affect, right feelings can, of course, impact behavior. Nevertheless, in the view of some people, like John Harris, for example, using drugs like citalopram or other selective serotonin uptake inhibitors, SSRIs, it's a mouthful, to manipulate affect merely produces prosocial behaviors. So a prosocial behavior is just a behavior that is considerate of the well-being of others. So we can impact prosocial behaviors. But these drugs, like SSRIs, cannot make morally better or morally virtuous people. SSRIs, for example, have been shown to decrease or even totally eliminate aggression in people. And I was just reading 2 days ago another story about a study, a very small study, that used brain stimulation techniques to decrease regular aggression, but also in particular sexual aggression. But again, I don't think moral enhancements can engender true virtue. And the reason that moral enhancements cannot make people truly virtuous instead of merely pro-social is that these enhancements do not involve moral judgment. They tinker with affect in order to promote certain behaviors and not other behaviors. But there's no cognitive input. There's no reasoned discernment. And it's clear from the Aristotelian account, proper affect is a necessary, but it's not a sufficient condition for the possession of real moral virtue. Prudence, an intellectual virtue, helps one to see, deliberate, judge, and then act rightly in a particular situation, and that's also needed. Prudence involves cognitive input. So, while biomedical technologies may be used to supplement hormones and edit genes linked to affect, neither of these technologies can give someone prudence. According to Aristotle, prudence is a virtue that just requires life experience. It's not a virtue belonging to the young because, and I quote here, he says, a young man, or woman for that matter, has no experience. It's length of time that gives experience. So given his account of moral education, which we just breezed through, his view that prudence belongs only to the old shouldn't really be surprising because children and young people learn through punishment and reward and by imitation. And they begin to acquire prudence, which allows them to comprehend new situations, to begin to deliberate well, make a judgment, and then act rightly. And again, all of that takes time, which is why Aristotle thinks that wisdom only comes with age. Practical wisdom only comes with age. No biomedical technology can give the sort of worldly experience, give the kind of worldly knowledge that experience can give. So maybe at this point you're thinking, maybe I've persuaded you just a little bit. So you think, okay, fine, no technology can engineer real Aristotelian virtue in humans, but who cares? Wouldn't we be better off as a society if we were just to use moral enhancements, even if they don't give real Aristotelian virtue? Wouldn't we be better off? And my answer is no. We would not be better off. And to see why, I want to call our attention to mice. Or more precisely, 2005. It's a little bit old, but there have been other more recent studies that complement this one. 2005 study of mice and the gene Stathman, which is linked to both innate and learned fear. So in the study, there are two groups of mice. Some mice had the gene, other mice had the gene Stathman knocked out. And Stathman is responsible for controlling or partly controlling our responses to danger by triggering certain neural circuits. Now, each group of mice was introduced to 2 new environments. The first new environment was an open field. So both groups of mice were exposed to the field, and there were all sorts of dangers that could have befallen them in the open field. A second environment is this elevated plus maze pictured here. And, let me just get to the point. So the knockout mice, the mice without the gene Stathman, made more entries into that open field, but they also, significantly, made more entries into that open arm of the maze. And you can see that it doesn't really have the human equivalent of guardrails. So here's another picture. This is actually a rat, not a mouse. But just looking at him makes me kind of nervous. Okay? So, in my view, these mice without the gene Stathman engaged in some reckless, risky behaviors. They went out onto this open arm of the maze and they spent more time in the open field, made more entries to the open field than the non-knockout mice and the ordinary mice. And this seems kind of risky and dangerous to me. So I think that what we see in mice could be applied to humans. Suppose we were to tinker with human genes linked to fear. There's not a one-to-one matchup, but we have explored this, or some have explored this in the scientific community. We might expect these humans, like the knockout mice, if we were to tinker with their fear genes, to be reckless at worst, or a little naive at best, like this rat. Suppressing genes associated with fear doesn't thereby make humans to be courageous, and it doesn't clearly make human beings to be better off. So instead, individual humans likely would be harmed on account of their reckless or naive behavior, just like this rat may very well fall off the open arm of this maze. These humans could take unnecessary risks on whatever the human equivalent of that open arm of the maze. Fill in the blank. They could take unnecessary risks. So moral enhancements are likely to be harmful because they can only increase or decrease certain hormones in the body or turn off or on certain neural circuits to bring about desired affect or attitude. They have no corresponding impact on cognition. As John Harris puts it, and I quote, "The intervention is designed to bypass reasoning and act directly on attitudes." Thus, the person receiving a moral enhancement will be no better off than those without the moral enhancement at sizing up a situation, deliberating about what to do, making a judgment, and then acting on it. Given that moral enhancements do not and cannot, in principle, come with a corresponding enhancement of prudence, I think they produce in human subjects something like the Aristotelian equivalent of innate natural virtue. Natural virtue might be harmful because those with natural virtue don't know how to act well in a particular given situation. They lack prudence. So too would morally enhanced individuals lack prudence. For this reason, I think moral enhancements at least should be eyed with caution, if not altogether avoided. So, I get it. The doomsday clock is ticking. People are committing violent acts all the time. And innovative people, like so many of you here in this room, are looking for solutions. But moral enhancements are just not the answer. Moral enhancements, at best, may result in a greater prevalence of prosocial behavior, but without prudence, they carry with them huge risks. There's just not a quick fix to greed and hatred and violence and selfishness. Rooting out bad tendencies, rooting out vices, for Aristotle, just requires the long and arduous work of habituating oneself to the good. There are no shortcuts. Thanks.
Thank you very much. A really interesting paper.
Oh, thanks.
Say we went along with the Aristotelian picture you sketched very compellingly, and said that, yes, we need just experience to get prudence.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you could envisage a scenario in which we are able to speed up cognition, we can move about the world faster, we can interact with people faster, such that the amount of experience that the enhanced person gets in any given hour is far greater than the experience that an unenhanced. Would that count as a moral enhancement in your paradigm?
Oh, so I'm just getting a picture here. I'm kind of like thinking about a VHS tape on fast forward, and it's just like zipping through life. So you're saying if we could just move faster, and just in a natural way, moving through life, get more experience, could that do the trick? Could that actually give us prudence? I guess so, because we're still just having ordinary interactions, right? Even though we're sped up. I guess so. Do you think that's possible? Okay, I'll have to think about that one more.
Thanks for the talk. Is this working?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So, yes, I will. So thanks for the talk. I really like where you're going with this, but I like to follow up on the previous question and to expand this a little bit. So, it seems to me that there might be some ways of enhancing prudence, not just the fact that you can do it faster, but something like, isn't it the case that what we can learn from different situations depends on certain kinds of cognitive abilities? Yeah. And perhaps those abilities that we use to learn from different situations can be enhanced. Something like perception might be able to be enhanced, memory might be enhanced in one way or another, and that could then at least make our prudence a little bit better, or in that way contribute to the whole thing. So it seems to me that that there is a room for cognitive enhancement that might then help the prudence to develop. Of course, not directly. You can't just do it by popping a pill.
Yeah, I think I'm okay with that. So you're saying that we're not actually giving somebody prudence, but we might, because what goes into prudence would be, perceptual faculties and memory, and so we could enhance those things, perhaps. I might have other reservations about doing that sort of thing, but whether that's possible, I think it is. That's not giving somebody prudence, because that takes experience, but sure. I agree with you on that. Thank you.
I had the exact same question.
Thanks, John.
Yes, my question is that it seems, I'm sorry, I've got two things I just wanted to
Okay, maybe one at a time, because I don't have very good memory. I need the enhancement.
The first one is simply, in order to improve prudence, have you come across and have you any experience of Buddhist meditation mindfulness, which is the whole aim of it is to get people to stand back from experience and give them more time to look at their own emotions and their own drives and therefore behave more responsibly. And the second one was...
So let me talk about that. So you're saying, am I familiar with the Buddhist meditative practice?
Yes.
So not directly, but there would be a correlate in the Christian tradition. So, for even to this present day, in say the Catholic tradition, there practices of taking periods of silent retreat, right? And so this is a time of kind of slowing down, listening to what God is saying to you, maybe getting in touch with one's affective dimension. What are the movements of the spirit? So sure, I'm familiar with that from the Christian tradition, not so much from the Buddhist tradition. Okay. Second question.
The second question was there's been recently here in England, there was people who've been paedophiles, and some of them have been calling for a particular medication, which which actually reduces their desires to behave in that sort of way.
Yes.
And it would seem to me that all of us have got all sorts of mixes, that the more science knows about what our particular drives are, there may be that there will be particular things which each individual might need, which will be different.
Yeah, so I was actually just lately reading about pedophile cases or cases of, in general, sexual offenders. So in the United States of America, there are laws on the books in several states, and there's a proposal in Oklahoma, I think. There's legislation that state is trying to put through on required chemical castration for certain categories of sexual offenders. I don't know what the laws over here in the UK are. However, so I was very intrigued by this idea, and I read a case of a man. So this is just one example. I don't know if it's true across the board, but in his case, he himself was not a legal sexual offender, but he had illicit relations. So he was married and had an affair, and he just couldn't stop, basically. And so he wanted to work it out in his marriage, so he decided to become chemically castrated, which meant he could no longer have relations with his wife or anybody. And it did solve the problem. So he stopped committing adultery physically, but he said the feelings, the desire to commit adultery, to have relations with women, not his wife, never stopped. So it seems to me in that case, and I don't know if it's true across the board for cases of chemical castration, in that case, that would be an example of like a behavior. So the goal of that moral enhancement would be to alter behavior. It did not, in fact, alter the attitudes at all. And I'd say that didn't make that man morally virtuous at all. He stopped doing that action, but in his heart, he wanted to, he just couldn't. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
For sure. Thank you.